Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning for Coffee with SHS, the first one in January 2026. So, Happy New Year to everybody. Hope your year is starting off really, really well. I wanted to introduce this morning my co host and myself from the SHS group with the iChiefs, as we get the honor to be to kind of co host this session today. Chief Darren Wallenstein from Sarasota County, Florida, is joining me. And my name is John Schmidt. I'm retired out of Florida. So um, we're excited to be here. And this is a very special, it's special to me. I took up the battle for helping others and fighting cancer and helping our members to kind of get through that battle and how to protect themselves as much as we can. So we have a great group this morning to have that conversation with. And as we've done in the past, this is going to be very generic, very organic. There's not PowerPoints. There's no presentation, so to speak. There's just speaking from the heart, speaking from the brain, speaking from what makes sense. So I also want to recognize three of our Safety, Health, and Survival section members who are joining us today, Chiefs Emmanuel, Scaris, and Chief Rund. Thank you for joining and supporting this very important project that we have going on today. So as we kind of move forward, the topic today is going to be Firefighter Cancer Awareness Month. And I know that this is getting pushed. It's only 5 or 6 years old, as we've been talking previous to starting the show this morning, but it's really picking up. I think similar back to Safety Stand Down, which Chief Wallenstein is the
supposed to be on a conference call right now. So
That's fine.
no, I'm just not important. It's
so he's the chair, and it really is so important that we pick up this battle. We kind of keep on working and fighting till we can protect our members as best we can. So with that, our guest today, we have actually, before we go to the guest, just as a quick housekeeping, we typically will not recognize raising hands. So if you have a question or a comment, please put it in the chat. And at the end of the session, with about 15 minutes or so left, Taylor, our liaison with the iChiefs, will put all the questions together, and then she'll fire them back at us so our group can answer those as appropriate. We will also be sharing 2 QR codes at the end of the show. One would be, you do not have to be a member of the iChiefs. You do not have to be a member of the Safety, Health, and Survival section to participate. So we want to, but if you would like to join, we'll have a QR code for that, as well as have the QR code up for the National Firefighter Registry. So we all believe in that project, and so we want to give you an opportunity to go on to the NFR and complete that survey. So today we have 3 outstanding guests: Chief Frank Leeb, Dr. Gavin Horn, and Joe Schumacher from the Firefighter Cancer Support Network. I'm going to go through real quick their bios, and then we'll kind of get going into today. So Chief Frank Leeb, who's retired out of New York City, is the managing director of the First Responders Center for Excellence. He previously served as a deputy assistant chief in the Fire Department of New York, retiring in 2024 with more than 31 years. His tenure with FDNY, he held several senior staff positions, including the chief of the Fire Academy, chief of training, and chief of safety. Frank has also been a member of the East Farmingdale Fire Department since 1983 out on Long Island. He is also author of the best-selling book, Cornerstones of Leadership, On and Off the Fireground, and the co-author of 30 Years You Must Know. He is also a senior advisor and minority owner of Crackle Magazine. Dr. Gavin Horn. Gavin Horn is the director of research with the Fire Safety Research Institute, part of UL Research Institutes. Gavin's research interests range from firefighter health and safety and first responder technology development to materials testing and non-destructive evaluation. Prior to joining the FSRI team, he served as the director of IFSI research programs at the University of Illinois Fire Service Institute for 15 years, and as a firefighter engineer with the Savoy, is that right? Fire Department in Illinois. Gavin holds a doctorate in mechanical engineering from the University of Illinois, as well as a master's degree in fire protection engineering from the University of Maryland. He has published over 70 peer-reviewed journal manuscripts and given presentations at meetings, conferences, and symposia around the world. And Joe Schumacher. Joe is a 35-year veteran of the fire service. He has been serving as a chief operations officer for the Firefighter Cancer Support Network since 2017. He retired as a captain from the city of Fairfax Fire Department in Virginia in 2018. Joe is a 3-time cancer survivor and is passionate about ensuring that firefighters who receive a cancer diagnosis receive the support that they need throughout their battle. Additionally, he is dedicated to educating firefighters about the modifiable risk factors they can control to reduce their exposure to carcinogens and lower their chances of developing cancer. So thank you guys for being willing to be our guest today. As we kind of dive into this, I think it's really important, at least it was for me, to know what your why is. My why started about, probably 16 years ago now, where I had one of my firefighters that I actually went to school with came into my office day before Thanksgiving and said, "Hey, Chief, I wanted to let you know I've got cancer." He died the following February, just a couple of days before he was eligible for retirement. At the time, I was the hazmat commander in the county where I worked, and I know a little bit about cross-contamination and all of that. So I wanted to try to do some stuff to make differences. And after that death, we were able to move forward and start doing some very fantastic things. And then at one of the most recent departments I had, where we started a Decon team that actually went to fire scenes to exchange bunker gear on scene and wash gear and start the decon process similar to what hazmat does, but we did it on fire scenes. One of my original technicians got brain cancer, and then he died just a few years ago. So those are my whys, caused my passion to go out and try to educate our firefighters that there are ways to kind of reduce our exposures to cancer, and hopefully that will work long term. So I think it's important that we kind of hear what the why is from our guests today. So let's go ahead and start. Frank, if you wouldn't mind starting, and then we'll go to Gavin and then to Joe.
Oh, yeah, thanks for having me. My why is I'm tired of losing my friends, and it's hard to find anybody in the fire service that has any amount of time that hasn't experienced loss, or that doesn't know somebody that is currently battling occupational cancer. And the bottom line is we know a lot of the best practices. We could and should be better, and we need to be better. And webinars like this enable us to be better tomorrow. And I'm excited to be here. I'm coming to you from Carolina Beach in North Carolina. My cup of coffee today. My table has about 100 firefighters, and I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to show you everybody real quick. See if I could do this without losing it. Hold on. Yeah, there they are.
Love it. That's awesome. Make sure you let them all know that we appreciate them joining us this morning. That is awesome.
Yeah, and thanks for having me. And I'm back. This is good. I didn't lose my connection. I thought I might, but yeah. So thanks for having me. This is great.
Hey, Frank. So if you could just briefly elaborate. I know your why, but I know that this is what you brought to FDNY as a part of the firefighter cancer cohort study, and why it's so important to all your firefighters there in New York and across the country. So if you can just speak to that just briefly before we get to Gavin and to Joe.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate that. Well, I mean, listen, we all know about September 11th, and we lost 343 firefighters on September 11th that day. But we've now eclipsed that number, and we're actually over 400 firefighters that have died from occupational illness since then. So 9/11 was a career's worth of exposure in one day, in 1 month, in a short period of time. But the reality of it is, in the fire service, if we're not doing what we can to protect ourselves, the 9/11 is also individual events. 9/11 is also a cumulative effect of all the different responses that you go to. We know there's black swan events where we know a 9/11, a New York telephone fire, and there's different, right? So it's looking like the Maui fires. It's looking like the California fires, that folks that responded to those, they've gotten a career amount of exposure in a short period of time. But we can't put our guard down. We just need to do better and not think about it as just a 9/11 problem. We had the right leadership in place when I became, as I was promoting up the FDNY, and they took an interest in it as I did. I had some great leadership that enabled me to lead a committee that still goes on. In fact, John Hasney, who's now a deputy chief, I lose track of his ranks because he started with me as a lieutenant when I saw him. And I see he's on this call today, and he's now heading that up. So seeing members of the FDNY on this call today is inspiring to me, that we're continuing to it, that it's not one individual's passion that fuels it, and that we continue to make strides. But we all need, we're all in this together. The idea is we're all pulling in the same direction. We just need to get everybody on the same rope. And that's, I think, when like the variety of speakers that you have here, and as I look at the attendees, that's what we have here, and that's important.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Frank.
Gavin, you're up.
All right. Always hard to follow Frank, and especially in a topic like this. But my why has actually evolved throughout the years, and as I think it probably has for many people. I initially began being interested in this area back in mid-2000s as we were beginning a research program at the Illinois Fire Service Institute, as Department of Homeland Security was ramping up, particularly the Science Technology Directorate, and research was really kind of being pushed out in new ways in the fire service. I think it's been said multiple times, we're in the golden age of research for the fire service because of the investment that's been made, both financially, but also in the people and organizations, from Miami to Arizona to Illinois to Seattle to New York. There's been an impressive amount of work that's gone into research to support firefighter health and safety. But as we began ramping up our program in 2004, 2005, it was mostly focused on cardiovascular risk. We're also looking at slips, trips, and falls and biomechanics and some of the challenges of moving, particularly as departments were moving into bunker gear from some of the old, what we used to call Chicago-style gear in Illinois. Cancer risk and hazards on the fireground really were not on many people's radar. In fact, it wasn't until the Grace LeMaster study, which was 2006, that it really became an awareness for many folks. And we began working in the area. Fortunately, as Kenny Fent joined NIOSH back in 2008, 2009, we had an opportunity to begin talking with him about how we can integrate some of the NIOSH measurements into the work that we had been doing at IFSI. And that really began a wholesale amount of research that we've conducted at UL Fire Safety Research Institute, Illinois Fire Service Institute, NIOSH, to really try to understand what are those hazards on the fire ground, on the training ground, at car fires versus home fires versus industrial fires, and during everything from fire suppression to investigation. And as we've been doing this work and starting to understand those hazards and those risks, we've heard the stories that Frank mentioned, that you mentioned, Chief, of the individuals who have been affected by this. We had human subjects research at University of Illinois, where we had firefighters coming from California, from Florida, from FDNY, to participate, to be a part of this project, to help to understand what were some of those risks, but also to tell their story and to add their voice to the risks, to the needs to understand the risks and the face for those projects. So the needs, the why has evolved greatly from kind of a need for understanding the science to really a hope that we can make an impact for those firefighters so that they can enjoy a longer retirement than they do during their careers. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Gavin. I appreciate that. I wanted to also recognize before Joe gives his why is Chief Warren from the group is also on. And also to remind everybody, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat, because we're likely not going to recognize you and open up your mic. I appreciate that. Joe?
And I think, John, we also have Tim Wayne from our sections board that's
okay.
also on.
Awesome. Thank you, Chiefs, for taking time out of your busy day and your schedule to join us today. I think this is going to be a great coffee session.
Joe, good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here. So my whys, I've actually got a couple. As you mentioned earlier, I'm a 3-time survivor, and what I want to do is hopefully through things like we're doing today with this coffee table chat is reduce and hopefully one day eliminate any of my brothers and sisters ever having to go through a diagnosis. The other side for me for the whys are pretty selfish, really. I wanted to live a long, healthy retirement. I wanted to be able to experience all those important family events, the milestones of seeing your children walk down the aisle, of meeting your grandchildren, and things like that. So those are my whys. Hopefully everybody here today will give a little bit of thought to that and really commit to ensuring that they are reducing their exposures and whatever they can do to reduce their brothers and sisters.
Awesome. Hey, Joe, at our pre-meeting, you talked about the percentages from last year. Can you share those again? Because I think that's going to be really important as we kind of go into what I want to talk about next, of identifying and understanding our exposures and our risks. I'll have Gavin kind of touch on that again. And I know Chief Leeb can do the same. But I think it's really important because that kind of shocked me.
Sure.
Now, these are people diagnosed. They're not necessarily deaths from cancer.
Yeah, that's correct. So, there's a notion out there that some people don't believe there's a bad problem of cancer in the fire service, and that's absolutely not true. And the Firefighter Cancer Support Network will support firefighters or their immediate family members who have received a cancer diagnosis. Over the last few years, we continue to see an increase. And just to give people an idea, in 2024, we assisted 330 firefighters across the nation who had received a cancer diagnosis. With us just completing 2025, in 2025, we assisted 456. So that's a 38% increase over the previous year. And that's pretty much followed what we've seen in previous years, although 2025 was a little bit more extreme than the last few.
That is. And, sometimes I was having a conversation, I don't remember, maybe Gavin, this was on the last podcast that we did together. We talked about the 9%, 14%. I don't know if that's an old statistic or if it's still relevant today. I mean, I know when it came out through NIOSH, but I don't know how relevant that is. Has it gone up? Has it gone down?
Yeah, those are numbers from the 2013 study from NIOSH, the Doug Daniels study, which really kind of provided, at the time, the largest study of firefighters compared to the general population and looking at that relative increase in risk. And this is a place where our good friends, the National Firefighter Registry for Cancer, are going to be able to provide us with some new relevant information as we get more enrollees into that program. So we don't have, there's been a couple other studies that have continued to look at this, but this will be a game changer once the NFR is able to start doing some of the analysis. And they've gotten to a point now where I believe they're at nearly 40,000 enrollees into the NFR, where there's a large enough numbers they can begin looking at these analyses, looking at similar analyses to update where we believe those relative risks are at. There's going to be a lot more, as this is going to evolve for years, for decades into the future. And with this new capability, we'll be able to understand how that changes throughout time. as the fire service changes and puts in different practices and protocols and policies, but also importantly, prevention and some of the detection and awareness that is now becoming more commonplace in the fire service. So we don't have any numbers that are really allow us to make some updates on what you shared there, but NFR is really going to help us to do that in the future.
Awesome. It kind of it brings to mind that what do we need to do? We talk about evaluating risks in the fire service. Chief officers, we do it a lot in CRR. What are the risk hazards, and then what is that plan to kind of work through that, and how do we address it? Chief Leeb, FDNY is huge. How do you go about the education, the putting together things, processes in place to help reduce the exposure or to minimize the exposure or to address the exposure after an incident?
Yeah, well, so sound practices have sound reasoning. So every single thing that we do isn't the world according to Frank Leeb or now John Hasney. It's the world of combining best practices from the FDNY experience with the research, and that research, a lot of it. In fact, I was telling as Gavin was introducing himself, I was explaining to some of the folks in the crowd here about all the research that Gavin has done, not just related to cancer, but some of the stuff with the search study and how that impacts how we search dwellings and survivable space and all these different things, how that interrelationship of it. But so it has to be grounded in research, right? I have to be able to point it back to something. That's how we get funding for initiatives. That's how we get new equipment, all of that type of stuff. But so the question seemed to be focusing on, well, how can a department so big as New York City? But so first off, size shouldn't matter, whether you're the biggest department in North America or you're a small department. It's not none of that should be an excuse to do something to make yourself better. And the way you do that is through education. We produce videos. We had partnerships with different people, even using social media, because social media, your firefighters are a consumer of your social media. So even if you have an officer that sucks and doesn't share information with the troops, by putting it out through different mediums and different partnerships and different publications, there's lots of different ways to that our firefighters consume information. But the education based on sound practices that are grounded in research, I think, is the best way to go about it. Does it take a long time to teach every firefighter in the FDNY? If we're relying just on education day, it would take us, annual education day takes us close to 18 months to get through every firefighter. But when we accelerate that process, when we utilize all the different means at our disposal to educate our firefighters.
And that's awesome. I appreciate you. Go ahead.
So Chief Schmidt, I know that Gavin was directly involved in research that was the foundation for preliminary exposure reduction.
Yes.
I know that he and Kenny Finn worked closely together on research that most departments across the country, if they are doing their due diligence, that they are foundationally applying whatever exposure mitigation that's based on solid research. So Gavin, if you could, in just a short elevator pitch on the work that was done between you and Kenny and the preliminary exposure reduction, of which we based all of that and all of the FEMA research that was conducted from 2014 to 2015 that ultimately resulted in the change in the IARC rating for the firefighter occupation as being a known carcinogenic in some cases. Expand on that a little bit for us.
Yeah, in terms of the study that we conducted back in 2015 for Decon, I would say that was one of the things where Kenny's bringing his knowledge and his vision into the fire service. Some of the very earliest research that we did was just trying to understand what are the things that can be done on the fire ground to help reduce some of the hazards, not necessarily to eliminate all of those hazards, but to understand these are some things with relatively low investment at least in terms of dollar investment, that you can put into place. And we found that we're able to get 85% of the pHs that are on the surface of the gear off. That doesn't, we weren't looking at those that were embedded into the gear that would need to have an advanced cleaning in order to remove. But what are the things that you could do so that if you go back to the fire station, you're not rubbing that off on the apparatus? And this was before we were talking about clean cap, right? It wasn't going back to the station with you. You could drop those on the fire ground that was already contaminated, and we could get 85%. And really, that's one class of compounds, the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which include compounds that are known carcinogens, as well as potential and possible carcinogens. And there's been some work since then to understand what are the trade-offs, right? We found out that we can do a much better job with a wet soap decon, which is what we called at the time, which has now become, Chief, as you mentioned, preliminary exposure reduction in the NFPA standards. And within about 5 minutes, with $100 worth of investment, you can knock off about 85% of those compounds. A lot more work needs to be done in this area because the exposures are changing. Particularly, we're doing work right now looking at lithium-ion battery fires, electric vehicle fires, but there's also lithium-ion batteries and can be in most homes, right? And we know that they give off a large number of metals. So we need to continue to understand what is the impact. Can we get off a high amount of metals and others that have other compounds that could create health risks for the fire service? So as you said, and as I think Chief Leeb said, we've been able to get fire departments to understand how this can improve through some of the scientific measurements, right? We can reduce those risks to pHs by doing this simple process. And by doing academic peer-reviewed publication research, there's now departments who can lay that paper down on the chief's desk or on whoever holds the purse strings to say, this is why we want to do it. It's not just because we think it's a good idea. We have some data that shows that this can reduce some of those compounds that might be going back with us to the station, reduce some of those exposure hazards. And that's, I think, what has become powerful, again, with the DHS funding through fire prevention safety grants. So much research has been conducted over the last 20 years that has provided that data, that information, that science that backs up why we want to do some of these different tactics, procedures, techniques in order to reduce some of those risks.
The beauty of that,
Yeah.
right? So that report that Gavin did, I've helped dozens of departments write preliminary exposure reduction SOPs based 100% on the research that was done in that paper. And then they're able to, so when you tie that in, they're able to get funding, as mentioned. And now NFPA 1585, which both Gavin and myself were members of, is now out. So that's all now in our standards as well. So you see how the life cycle is. And Gavin and his team, both when he was at Illinois Fire Service Institute and with UL, so researchers are, their funding is heavily dependent on writing research papers, but they're also able to read the tea leaves and give us actionable intelligence for the firefighters, where we can translate that to what does that look like on the fire ground, and that's the value of the researchers that understand how to, what's the end goal, right? The end goal is to have actionable research, actionable intelligence for the firefighters, and that report is a fantastic example of it that is now in standards and is in literally at this point probably hundreds if not thousands of SOPs probably around the world.
Thanks, Chief. And if I could also just one other piece in addition to that, one of the things that we do, as Chief Leeb mentioned, at FSRI is a large number of studies that are focused on tactics and strategies, whether it's search or applying water from different locations and different tactics for that application. And so we do a lot of live fire burning. And we've implemented these processes, this decon, during those studies. And so we've done this probably hundreds of times at FSRI. And one of the things that's allowed us to do is to understand some of the challenges operationally. It's one thing for us to give you a number that's an 85% reduction in PAHs, but eventually you as chiefs or the company officers are going to have to put this into place. And there are challenges. We've done it in Ohio when it's been 100 degrees out and you got the vibra alert going off while you're staying on air and all you want to do is take your mask off. And we've done it in Ohio with Chief Leeb there filming us at about 20 degrees. And we've understood there are challenges in implementing this in the real world. And much of what we've done over the past 5-6 years is start to talk about some of those challenges that you might have when you implement this, and what are some things that can be done, put in place so that you still can achieve the goals of the preliminary exposure reduction. And as Frank mentions, you don't have to make perfect get in the way of good, right? I mean, there are things that we can do that can help to make this a feasible approach to help reduce some of the risks for the firefighters, understanding that it may not be perfect in every single situation. But continuous research, not just to say, thou shalt do this, but here's some challenges that you might overcome while you're trying to implement it, and here's how you can potentially overcome those. And places like this where you can share best practices and how it has been done are critically important for the fire service to engage.
So I think that, Gavin and both Frank, I think you bring up very good points that there are things that we can control. We can control doing preliminary exposure reduction. We can control the things that make it back into the cab. We can control, and in some departments across the country, this might sound crazy, but putting driver operators or engineers on air while they are at the fire scene. There are things that we can control, but there are obviously things that we can't control. We can't control the amount of calls we get over 24-hour shift. We know that 24-hour shift schedules are a known carcinogenic occupation. We know that there is genetics that come into play. So Joe, from the Firefighter Cancer Support Network, what support can be established now for those things that potentially will come our way as firefighters? Because whether we're eating right, working out, sleeping well, there are so many things that we can't control. What is it that the Firefighter Cancer Support Network is there to support our firefighters?
So you're exactly right, Darren. They're modifiable risk factors, right? Some of them we can't control, like whether we're a male, female, that type of thing. But based on the 2013 white paper that the Firefighter Cancer Support Network authored with researchers and scientists, there are a lot of things that we can control. Oh, am I still with you?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. And some of that stuff is really simple. And I've seen it already discussed in the chat. It's using your SCBA from the time of fire attack all the way through overhaul. It's doing the gross decon. It's simple things that are really pretty inexpensive, like getting the baby wipes and using those when you come out and after you've taken your gear off, washing your gear, taking a shower as soon as you can after an exposure. And, we're not just talking structure fires as far as exposures. When you run a dumpster fire or an auto fire, you're also receiving those same exposures. And I don't think a lot of people really put much thought into that, but nobody knows what's in a dumpster, right? And if you go up and you're fighting that fire without an SCBA on or without your regulator attached, you're inhaling all of that stuff and receiving those exposures then. So taking the simple steps that, for the most part, are very inexpensive and easy for a department to implement, whether that's on a firefighter's own initiative or through policies, can really reduce what their chances of getting cancer are.
Yeah, you're right. I see Chelsea Kavanaugh's on today from University of Miami, and she was telling us a story that she was recently at the fire investigators meeting here in Florida, and they're very excited. And what Joe was just talking about, it's not just the structural firefighters that need to dress properly at all events, not just the house fire, not just the industrial fire, but the car fires, dumpster fires. And now we're having conversations about our investigators and our wildland firefighters. What are they supposed to wear? Because there's research, and I know Gavin can kind of chime in on this, that there's more and more research now pointing to our wildland firefighters getting cancer. So what do we do? But this is, and so part of this is also kind of changing culture, right? How do we change the culture? We have the education. We've talked about the education and how important that is. We kind of talked about policy without calling it policy. Most chiefs that I talked to, I had them, but because there's a policy and all the chiefs on board here, we have policies, to chief, I might say, yeah, we have a policy, so we know it gets followed because I'm the chief and, whatever I say goes. Well, here's a reality check. That's not always the way it goes. Just because there's a policy doesn't mean it's going to be followed. Should be. So really it comes down to culture. So let's talk about the culture in the fire service. As I kind of mentioned earlier, our friend Billy Goldfeder with the Safety, Health, and Survival section in our group chat will often send out these video or photos. And I'm not going to tell you which departments they were, but recently we've had a bunch of photos being shot of fires today, recent fires, with guys smoking cigars, guys working a roof, cutting up a roof without SCBA on, firefighters without bunker gear on or partial bunker gear. So we need to change that. We need to change and express how in our education, how all of these exposures are causing cancer, potentially can cause cancer. So, I know it's a culture thing. So what are your thoughts on the culture? Whichever one of you wants to go first, it's up
I
to
think
you.
it's a couple of things. First of all, it has to be personal, right? And that starts with determining your why. As I said earlier, you want to, when you're done with your fire service career, live a long, healthy retirement afterwards. Because if you do, there's steps that you need to take during your career to reduce those exposures and therefore your chances of getting cancer. But it also is, like you mentioned, it's the department leadership setting policy. And then in my opinion, the most important person is the company officer. They have the greatest influence and impact, I believe, on a firefighter, especially a brand new firefighter. Because if they teach them right in the beginning and the right things to do, then they'll hopefully continue that throughout their career. And if we continue to do that, eventually the culture will change. And I hope one day we will see a reduction in firefighters getting cancer. I'll tell you, we joke that it's not a joke with the Firefighter Cancer Support Network. One of our dreams is that we're no longer needed, and unfortunately, I don't know that we'll ever probably achieve that, but that's I think a lofty goal and hopefully one that we'll get to one day. But until then, it's, like I said, in my opinion, it's a personal decision, and it's also the departments, the fire service leadership, and the company officers who really need to push it and pound it home to their people. And I'll stop here in a second, but in my opinion, the company officer's primary job is to make sure their people go home at the end of their shift safely, right? And that includes doing all the right things that's going to prolong their firefighters' lives, hopefully after they've left the fire service.
Yeah, that's Joe. That's spot on. I think when I have opportunity to speak at different events, I try to remember what you just said about making it personal, and I try to talk about the men and women, the sons and daughters, the moms and dads, the aunts and uncles who are firefighters. We've had the privilege of doing an awesome and having a great job. I love being in the fire service, but being a firefighter can't define me. I can't go out and everywhere I go, yeah, I'm a fireman, I'm a firefighter. That's important and that's great. But you know what? I'm a dad, I'm a grandfather, I'm an uncle, and I'm a husband, I'm a son. Those are way more important than ever being a firefighter. So I appreciate you bringing up making it personal. Chief Leeb, can you kind of chime in on the culture, your thought on the culture?
Yeah, sure. I mean, culture drives behavior. If we have a culture that values our people, that values our health and safety and wellness, if we have a culture that values saving lives and searching, well, those are all going to be part of of the culture and the behavior that you establish in your department. And in that regard, it was mentioned that company officers matter. Leadership matters. Leadership at all ranks matter. And that could be the senior firefighter that cares, and they're making sure that the firefighters are sending their gear out to be cleaned, or that the firefighter who hasn't had his medical in a long time is going for the medical. All of these things, it's interrelated. Ideally, it starts at the top of the organization, and leadership sets the tone for the culture of the department by demonstrating what values and what matters to him or her and the organization. But it's really about that's really what's driving the behavior. And if you have a culture that doesn't value your people, well, then it's usually pretty evident, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I kind of struggle when I hear Chief say, well, I have a policy. Well, policy doesn't drive the culture. How you act towards your people and how you care about your people and how you express that to them is what's going to drive it. We have to have policy, because somewhere along the line, well, no one told me I had to do that. Well, yes, it's written right here. So, Gavin, as I kind of come to you with the culture question, how does that relate into the research? Is there research that addresses that culture? That how's it being set and is being followed, and what prompts that culture change?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll have two answers to that question. First of all, there is some research that has looked at that in terms of how to help uptake of a message, to help people to understand the risks. It's not an area of research that we have done, but there's others that are working in this space that are really looking at that in terms of helping to understand how to make research work in practice. But the other thing I would say from a researcher's perspective is part of what can drive culture is information, is getting people the right information and data to make decisions. Again, going back to some earlier points that were made, is this is a relatively new concern in the fire service. I mean, go back 10 years, right? Is really when a lot of this push to educate the fire service about the hazards and the risks that are related to cancer have really been at the forefront. And many of us have been in those conversations for the last decade or so. And it might feel like we're kind of banging our heads against the wall or not reaching as far as we want, but realize that there's people who've been in the fire service for 20, 30, and 40 years. And there's a lot of momentum behind it. When I first started back in 2004, 2005, I shudder to think about some of the things that we did because we didn't know. Some of the times that we were working without SCBA, some of the times where we took the unnecessary smoke exposures because we didn't know, we weren't educated. And I think that was true for many people in the fire service. So we're getting the word out. We're translating the research into practice, but there's still 1 million firefighters in the United States. And some of these pictures may be coming in from places that they have not had this education. They have not had this message that has been shared with them. So we need to continue also to drive the message, why it's important, what can you do, and how can you put those things into place without getting too frustrated over the fact that we haven't got 100%. I think the amount of impact that's been had in the last decade is incredible. It's not where we want to be, but we should also understand and learn the lessons from those where we have had that positive impact, so that the education can help drive the culture, so that it's not just people who are going on emotion, that they have the information that they can share from company officers to their companies as why we're going to do this throughout the entire United States.
So,
Awesome.
hey, Chief Schmidt.
Go ahead.
Chief Schmidt, I just dropped into the chat for everybody. One of the deliverables from the Safety, Health, and Survival Section Board is the Provider's Guide to Firefighter Medical Evaluation. I know that I saw earlier in one of the other chat messages about early detection. Yesterday, I attended another line of duty death memorial service for cancer, claiming a firefighter in a neighboring department, leaving behind a wife, 2 kids, a grandchild, much too young to have succumbed to cancer as a result of being a firefighter. So being a cancer survivor myself, and that's my why in part for the things that we've been doing at my previous department with the Tucson Fire Department, and the great work being done by Jeff Burgess and his team at U of A, Dr. Caban Martinez at the University of Miami, Kenny Fint and everybody at NIOS and CDC and Gavin. I can keep going on and on with the name. There's a tremendous amount of effort and work being done in this sphere. But what happens is that we have a communication breakdown where whether firefighters are getting physicals or not, there's a guide I just dropped in there for everybody, a PDF, that if your department doesn't have the capacity to get you your annual physical, take this guide with you to your primary care for your physical so that they have an idea about what it is you're encountering as a firefighter on the areas of cancer, cardiovascular, or on behavioral health risk. So there's really no excuse other than the fact that we keep the communication going, just like in this coffee session. We got to keep the lines of communication open to make sure that everybody hears the same message.
Yeah, along those lines, I often get asked, "What can you do?" And for predominantly from senior firefighters, well, make sure you're getting your physicals. There's so much research now that supports catching cancer early. The survivability is high trajectory. It's very, very positive that success will be, survivability will be there. And Joe is one of those. I'll have Joe kind of chime in here in a second. I was fortunate to help start a OC Health program in my last department. And in the first 3 or 4 months, we had 5 members who they found something. They went to their primary care physicians. And to what Darren was saying, it's so important that the primary care physician understand our job, the risks and exposures every single day, because all of those primary care physicians wanted to sit and wait and watch. So we had the nurse practitioner contact those physicians. They all had surgery, all came back positive for cancer, but no chemo, no radiation, because they caught it so early, just the recovery from surgery. Early detection is going to save lives. And we're talking about a lot of external things here, but we have got to also get our butts to see our doctors and get these cancer scans. There's all kinds of cancer scans, and I don't want to get into that debate, which one's better, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. But the bottom line is we need to make sure we're getting there and doing that. Frank, go ahead.
Yeah, totally agree with what you're saying on that about making sure that you're getting your annual physicals and that we're getting screening. And so one of the silver linings of 9/11, I guess, for health treatment as well, and even just the sheer amount of firefighters that live in the area, is that when you go to somewhere with a symptom, they've probably seen it before. And especially if you're going to a doctor that sees a lot of firefighters. So having a doctor that speaks firefighter for some of these things is really important. And that's the value of the document that you dropped into the chat, is that if you see a doctor that doesn't know some of the things, like I usually tell them, I go to the doctor, and you have to be your own best advocate. If you're not advocating for yourself, don't expect others to do so for you. Sometimes I might just go for something that's whatever, minor, right? And they say, "Do you want your blood work done today?" I'm like, "Yeah, I do. I always want my blood work done because I'm a firefighter, and why not? Like, it can't hurt. Let's get it checked." But I just want to quickly address one of the other things that was said during what Gavin was talking about with departments that don't know, and the amount of times that I've heard fire chiefs say, "My department doesn't have a cancer problem," and I'm like, let me tell you, you have 3 problems. You have a cancer problem, you have a lithium-ion battery problem, and you have a mental health problem. Now, the whole society has a mental health problem, right? But and probably a lithium-ion battery problem as well. But if you're not, if you don't think you have a problem in those 3 areas, you're just not tracking it. And our generation of leaders will be based. We will be judged on whether we handle some of these issues, because if we don't get a handle on on the cancer issue in the fire service, and we don't get a better handle on the mental health issues in the fire service, we're going to continue to have a problem with recruitment. And I'll tell you what, I couldn't imagine doing anything other than being a firefighter. I am, we are the lucky ones to be part of this amazing profession. But you think about, why would somebody want their child to be part of a profession that isn't doing all they can, that has poor leadership, that doesn't do everything they can to protect and educate their folks? It's just, you think about the NFL several years ago with concussions, and that there's a generation of children in the United States that didn't play football because the parents didn't think that their children were being protected enough. And I think we face a similar crossroads. And it's no longer an excuse to have ignorance that you don't know the problem. If you're a fire chief in the United States, you must know the dangers. Otherwise, you shouldn't be a chief. And you're asleep at the wheel. It's malfeasance if you're not doing your job to do everything you can to protect your people. And that's why it goes back to leadership. Leadership matters. Educate your people. And as Gavin said, there's way too many people that have their head in the sand.
Absolutely. Joe, let's go back. And I appreciate that, Frank, that you're spot on. I think that what we're talking about today, I know that this group has probably had these conversations before, but it's good to bring it out again. But Joe, let's talk about, I know you're a cancer survivor. Let's talk about that, your early detection.
Yeah. So early detection was key for me. And I'll be honest, my first diagnosis, I was extremely lucky. And it was 1996, and I was a young father, had a 2-year-old daughter. And just being a 2-year-old, she was running around, and she ran into me and hit me in the groin. And, that's probably not uncommon, but I recognized that it hurt more than it should have. So very honestly, I had already had a doctor's appointment scheduled for some knee issues I was having. And when I was at that appointment, I mentioned to the doctor, hey, by the way, this is what happened. It hurt more than I think it should have. He did an exam, and he says, you've got an ultrasound in 2 hours. That led to my diagnosis of testicular cancer. And again, I was very lucky because it was caught stage 1. So had some surgery and radiation treatments, and I was good for 17 years. But during my radiation treatments, the radiation oncologist told me, he says, listen, you've earned the right to be paranoid about your health. He says, I'm not telling you to go nuts, but he said, if something doesn't seem right, get it checked out. All it's going to do is cost you your copay. And he was right. So 17 years later, I was in the shower and happened to notice a small bump in my groin. And long story short, it ended up being non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. But when I noticed that bump, I went to the doctor because it's not normal. Again, they did what they needed to do. I had a little bit of surgery, some more radiation, and I was good. So that was very beneficial to me. The other thing was your occupational medical exams that I was fortunate to get every year. And Frank mentioned the blood work. Well, when they started doing my PSAs over the years, they watched it go up, which that in of itself is not uncommon. But when it's going up more than it should, obviously the physicians take notice, right? And it wasn't until 3 years after I retired, but my urologist said, hey, listen, your PSA numbers have jumped more than I'm comfortable with from when you had them done 6 months ago. I want to do a biopsy, and sure enough, I had prostate cancer. So, but because I had those occupational medical exams and we saw what was going on and monitored it when the time was appropriate, and that was a decision between me and my physician, we did the biopsy and found it. And again, it was a stage 1 cancer. So had surgery and, knock on wood, but I've been good ever since. But you're right. The key there is early detection. I can't tell you how many times I've heard firefighters say, well, I just don't want to know. And I want to scream back at them, yes, you do want to know. And you want to know as early as you possibly can, because that's what's going to save your life. It's going to ensure that you get the medical care you need at a stage of the cancer that they're able to treat it, and you make a full recovery. So, I think we've gotten better. I hope we've gotten better, but I do believe there's still a long way to go towards it. Earlier you talked about culture. And one of the things that, again, can drive me nuts is when fire service leaders actually sabotage the message. And what I mean by that is they may bring people in to deliver classes, or they may put policies out, or whatever the case is. But then when you see them off duty, or maybe in the back of the firehouse, they've got a cigarette or a cigar or something like that. And I think to myself, what message are you sending to your people that you just told them cancer's a problem and that they need to take all these steps? And then they come out and they see you doing exactly what you've told them not to do to protect their health. Yeah, so I think that's something that we need to be careful of as fire service leaders, that when we deliver this message, we're not going out and sabotaging it when we're done.
Yeah, you're right. And actually, that was one of in our preliminary registration, that you mentioned about the tobacco use. We can have a great message about the cancer, and yet we still have firefighters in Florida. At least, we have the heart and lung bill, and we signed an affidavit that that we haven't smoked or used tobacco for at least 12 months prior to employment. Yet I go into firehouses all over the state of Florida. Guys are smoking cigars, they're dipping, they're chewing. The e-cigarettes are still, or not still, but they are becoming a problem as well. So you're right. We need to be consistent in our message across the board. What's right is right, and we need to enforce that. So. All right, we've talked about a lot of things, and I'm just trying to go through some of the notes of what some of our audience wanted to hear. So let's talk about some of the lessons learned. I think not necessarily lessons learned, but the processes that we need. In fire service, we're big on processes. We have a process that we check out the truck every morning. If you're a paramedic, you have a process to check out your EMS equipment every single morning. What is our processes? On-scene processes. Part of that process needs to be a big picture, early detection, annual physicals. As chiefs, we need to have those in place, but let's kind of bring it down to the company level and what they need to do, because cross-contamination is huge when you think about it. And I've talked about often with many people, radio straps. How many times do our guys and girls wear radio straps into the fire, then the bunker gear comes off and they put it on their duty uniform, and they're walking around the station, or they take it off in the station, put it on their chair, put it on their bunk, put it on the kitchen table, and it's contaminated. Or, our gloves are nasty. How many times do we clean our gloves? We don't. I didn't. I'm saying this not from observation, but from failing to do the right thing, mainly because I didn't know. So let's talk about some of those processes, and we kind of touch on them a little bit. That we have, the on-scene decon, that Gavin talked about, for a bucket with soap and water and a hose. I know that Frank was, demonstrated with a video of him doing it when it's 7 degrees outside. Well, guess what? That is one of the big things that I hear, well, we can't do it because it's ice. We have to worry about it icing and getting cold. So let's kind of talk about that. Let's build on that a little bit more, if we could, on building that into what we need to do as we move forward. Because a lot of our guests today that are watching want to have an idea of, okay, we know this. How do we move forward? Frank, you want to start us out?
Yeah, sure. I'll start us out. And I'm also going to combine it with a couple of the questions that are in the chat. And one of the questions that I got here. So, and in the chat, it talks about how do we combine being aggressive on the fire ground and off the fire ground with some of the things that we could be doing, right? Some of these processes that should be institutionalized, I think are, some of them are pretty basic. And one of them is exposure reporting. That was something that was asked here. I asked the people that are at the Command in the Sand conference that I'm at right now, what they want to talk about. And one of the things was exposure tracking. And there's apps out there now that you could be tracking your own exposure. It'd be nice if the department did it for us, but we can't rely on that. So download one of the apps. Make sure that you're tracking your exposures. As an officer, remind your firefighters to track those exposures. That's a simple way. Earlier, you heard talking about placing our engineers or our drivers on SCBAs. Well, how about just making sure that we consider the wind direction when we're placing our apparatus, right? We consider wind direction when we are when we're fighting the fire, right? Windward side is for winners, leeward side is for losers. We learned that in Proby school on our newest firefighters. Our command post. Why would our command post be positioned in the smoky environment? Most of the time, we could be positioning that away. So those are pretty common sense things that we can do. Wearing our SCBA. Every department has SCBAs. We don't wear them. When's the last time you washed the top of your helmet or even the inside liner of your helmet? How about we just don't do that. We get precancerous cells because we don't wash the inside liner of our helmet. When's the last time you washed your bunker boots? We send our gear out. You mentioned the radio straps. How about our boots? I could tell you when you do, when you step in diesel fuel, when you step in dog shit, or you have some type of speedy dry on it. Otherwise, we don't even consider those. Then we come back into the station and we walk around. Hopefully, we're not taking those boots into an area that is the living spaces of the firehouse. But even if we don't, we then take those dirty boots, we take them off, we put them on the sneakers and walk around. That floor now has some type of contamination on it. It's why we need to make sure that we're cleaning the apparatus floor regularly. We clean the outside of the fire truck to show pride in our company. We maintain it properly. But the inside surfaces that we know from research from Gavin Horn and others, that the material, that stuff contamination is settling, right, on those areas. So keeping those clean, there's just, when you think about it, we think about first in, last out. Well, then how you're showering as soon as possible. If you were the first due engine and you're the last one to leave the scene, it's just a greater exposure time. Making sure that we're using wipes. Gavin, again, more research that he was involved in. They used baby wipes that they got a store brand, and they showed a 54% reduction just in using baby wipes. Is it as good as soap and water? No, but it's getting some of that contamination off of you as soon as possible. How we take off our gloves. After a fire, when we're loading hose, you see firefighters, they take the hose and they're putting it right on their bare shoulder with a t-shirt on, or they're touching hose with bare hands. And that hose, forget the contamination, it just went through urine, feces, who knows what else was in there as we dragged it through, especially if it was a cluttered environment that we had the fire. So we're just getting contamination. I think about, especially in the volunteer fire service, following a working fire, it becomes a pizza party. And suddenly everybody's sitting around and we're eating pizza or something, right? I'm the guy running around saying, well, don't eat the crust because then you're going to ingest the contaminants. But we do that in the fire environment. We may not be even going into the decon area. I joke around. The only thing that would be worse is if we served them Kentucky Fried Chicken because it's finger licking good. But, we could literally go on. So when you evaluate the fire ground for all the things that we do on and off, right? There's so many different little things that we can do. It's death by 1,000 cuts. It's all these little things. So figure out where your department is and just be better tomorrow than you are today. And that could simply be when you come back from a run, wash your damn hands. We know from the pandemic, you sing happy birthday, 30 seconds, you wash your hands. You're now better. But no, what do? We have a problem with testicular cancer in the fire service. It's more than double the rate of a non-firefighter. All right, so you come back from a run, maybe you didn't even have a fire, but you don't clean the inside of your apparatus, so you have some contamination on your hands. And now you go to the bathroom, direct contamination. Gordon Graham puts it best when he says predictable is preventable. So there's little things that we can do. We take our gear off. The way we store it sometimes can increase our risk as well. We know that how much absorption increases as our body temperature increases from some of the research. There's so many different things. As I've said, don't let the pursuit of perfection get in the way of doing something. And as aggressive as you are on the fire ground, be as aggressive as cleaning up and putting yourself back in service. The firefighter is our greatest resource, but we don't even think about putting the firefighter back in service. We're more worried about the tools than we are ourselves. That's all I got to say about that.
I don't know. We need to say anything more. That was spot on. And you know, and you said it very well. Every department is different. But the bottom line is you have to do something. We've got to address. We know the science tells us using the on-scene Decon bucket that Gavin talked about, 85% of the contaminants comes off. 85%. That's just off our bunker gear. Taking a shower is that next big step. It's cost neutral, and we just need to do it. And you need to do it make it personal, because I'm a dad, I'm a son, I'm a brother, and so on. That is so important. Joe, what is your thought, your take on what we're doing, and how do we encourage other departments to do something? You're muted.
Sorry about that. I think it's really kind of simple. It's looking out for yourself as well as your brothers and sisters, right? And again, I know we've talked about it, and forgive me for harping on it, but you've got to establish your why. If you have a good rock solid why, put it in your locker at work or at the firehouse, so you see it every day when you go there. Post things around the firehouse just as a reminder for folks. You know, some of the handouts that we have with the Firefighter Cancer Support Network is a no gear beyond here. So at my firehouse, we put those on all the doors that were leading out of the apparatus bay. We had did you wash your hands signs. Those went up in all the bathrooms, in the kitchen, all over the firehouse. So I think it's ensuring that there's a constant reminder to everybody in the firehouse to make sure they're doing the right thing, as well as if you recognize that somebody's not doing the right thing, have the courage to say something to them. You don't have to call them out in front of everybody else, or maybe that's your way of doing it, but say something to them and just remind them of why it's important to take all of the steps that they can, that again are those modifiable risk factors that we actually have control over, because there's so much that we don't have control over. But take those things that you do have control over and maximize what you can do to benefit your health and wellness, so you have a long career in the fire service and hopefully post-fire service too.
Yeah, that's the most important. When I have conversations, is you put 25 in. The state fire marshal, the director of state fire marshal's office in Florida, she has a podcast, 30 in, 30 out. The idea is you put 30 in and you get 30 years out. And I want to see our firefighters break the pension bank. If they all live 25, 30 years after they retire, it's going to break. They're going to have to do something different. And we need to get there, because they are counting on us dying 7 to 8, 9 years after we retire. And I don't want to do that.
You're
Gavin,
right. And unfortunately, sorry, John, but unfortunately we see that way too often, right? Is we do see people who, and whether they're volunteer or career, doesn't matter, but they do their fire service career, and within 5 years after it, either they've developed cancer or they've developed some type of medical issue and died.
Yeah.
And, we can't say it's all attributable to the fire service, but I'll bet we can probably say some of it is anyway. And if they had just taken the time and cared enough about not only themselves, but more importantly, their families, to ensure that they're around, right? So it's a very personal thing that I think everybody needs to take seriously.
Thank you, Gavin. So we're going to finish up here with you in a second, and then let Taylor kind of put together some questions, and then we'll kind of get some of the questions from the group. So we've been talking about what, for fire departments, what can they take from today? What can they take to implement? Being as a firefighter and being as a researcher, what are the most important best practices that are cost neutral as much as possible for fire departments to be able to implement, whether you are a one station volunteer department in rural America or if you are FDNY? What does that look like?
And if I could just add to that, Gavin, and challenge you a little bit, is there a silver bullet? Is there something that is the one thing, or is it as Frank so clearly mentioned, all the little things that come together to make a big thing?
Wow. Well, the initial question was challenging enough, and that one I do actually have an answer for that, but I'll try to not take up all the rest of our time to answer the first question and then move on. And to me, I think what's the most important thing that you can put in place, and that's what you can get buy-in from your department. What can you feasibly do? And it's very different at different locations. There's differences in terms of what sort of monetary investment can be made, what type of training you have available to you. But in terms of cost neutral, some of the processes that Frank just so eloquently described are some places where you can start. A couple of years ago, we wrote a paper called The Hierarchy of Contamination Controls for the Fire Service. And I'm actually putting a link to it here in the chat for anyone who hasn't seen or might be interested in downloading it. We paid for the copyright, so it's free to download for anyone who wants it. If you're interested in this, we also have an online program on our FSA, our Fire Safety Academy, where if you don't want to read the whole thing, there's a 30-minute program. You can take a look at that. But it looks at what are the things that we can do in the fire service, kind of ranked along the lines of the hierarchy of controls, which is used by NIOSH for all occupations, not just the fire service. And unfortunately, one of the lowest on that hierarchy is personal protective equipment, which is unfortunately the default for many of the fire service. We ask a whole lot of our PPE, right? It's got to protect us from flames, got to protect us from hot gases, got to protect us from smoke, but we also have to do a whole lot of work inside there without overly restricting our movement and heat stress, etc. The next level on that is administrative controls, and that is really what Frank just went right through there. Those are the processes that you can put into place. And some of them are things just as simple as cleaning, right? We've done a good job of putting together a relatively low-cost approach for preliminary exposure reduction that you can do on the fire ground and knock off 85% of those surface PAHs. But it goes beyond there. When do you have to take that to more specialized cleaning? Cleaning the apparatus cab, cleaning the fire station bay. And in this paper, there's peer-reviewed academic research on each of those different topics that can help you to understand what are some of those risks, but also how you can, again, take that to whoever controls your purse string and say, this is why we need to do these sorts of things. We talk a little bit about donning and doffing PPE, particularly doffing of the PPE, right? We did a study years ago that looked at hoods, right? As these particulate blocking hoods were coming onto the market. What is the effectiveness of reducing the contamination gets to the neck in terms of wearing particulate blocking hood versus a typical 2-layer Nomex hood? And we also happen to look at what happens how you take it off. If you pull it down around your neck or if you just take it off over the top, which is a zero cost investment other than the training in order to get someone to change the way that they might doff their hood. And it turned out that was much more effective at reducing the contamination getting onto the neck than the hood. The design of the hood did make an impact. It did reduce that contamination getting to the neck by going to a particulate blocking hood, but we were more powerful in terms of changing the process of taking that off when it's feasible to do so. Just recently wrote a paper, same thing about the gloves, right? Gloves are one of the most contaminated things that we have on our hand. And the way you take off your gloves can impact how much gets on the hand. The gloves oftentimes do a good job protecting during the firefight or while you're working. And the contamination gets on there as they're being taken off. So a simple change in the process of how we take off our gear can actually greatly impact what gets on the body. And your hands are one of those things, I think Frank put it really well. Once it's on your hand, it goes everywhere, right? Whether you're wiping the snot out of your nose, tears from your eyes, whatever, the sweat off your face, or if you're not washing your hands before using the bathroom, right? All of these things matter. So those processes, looking at how to attack the fire. There was a question in the chat. Turns out that if we can get water on the fire more rapidly, we can reduce some of that exposure to the firefighters. And there's some research that has showed that by getting water in the fire as rapidly as possible, we can impact that exposure risk to the firefighters. A number of those administrative controls, from cleaning to tactics to what sort of policies you can put into place, that you can review there. Some might work for your department. Some you might have the funds in order to make the purchases or the investment. Some you might have training that can be done to put in place just to teach people while you're going through SCBA drills, teach how to take the hood off, just like you're trying to get people to put their SCB on as rapidly as possible during academy, right? We don't focus on that little piece. What are the things that you can do in terms of changing the way you fight the fire? Obviously, life safety is the number one priority, but you can also impact some of these exposure risks. And then I would also say most importantly is wearing the gear, right? We make a huge investment in the PPE that firefighters wear. Think about how much money is put in to what you wear when you go into a firefight, and wearing it appropriately from the beginning to end. I've seen that multiple times in the chat. It doesn't do us any good if we don't have it on. SCBA being one of those key pieces. So those are kind of, when we think about the administrative controls of processes, many of those are zero cost in terms of investment in new equipment. Only the need to have an investment in the training and education, the awareness, which we should not underestimate the impact or the importance of that. And now, Chief, on the last question of the silver bullet. Yes, the closest thing that we have to a silver bullet in the fire service is improving the fitness that we have for our firefighters. When we talk about what has been shown, not just in the fire service, but in the general population, to reduce cancer risk, to reduce cardiovascular risk, to reduce some of the health and safety concerns, well, we've seen actually improving ability to be firefighters. One of the most important things that we can do is continue to advocate for fitness for our firefighters, for the physical activity for them so that they can have a healthy lifestyle, because that has been shown to reduce some of the risk. It's not going to eliminate the risk, but as close as we have in the fire service to a silver bullet is the ability to improve the fitness of our firefighters and help to not only motivate them, but support them on that journey, particularly for those who are in the low fit category, to move in the direction of better.
So, Gavin, you're speaking my language, because if everybody hasn't heard that the topic for the safety stand down for 2026 is firefighter fitness. So there is a key component that you just raised, that it's another deliverable that we're bringing from the safety, health, and survival section by way of the safety stand down, and then our partnership with the IAFF, the NFPA, FDSOA, and our friends at the National Volunteer Fire Council. Fitness is a huge component to what we can do to have some level of control over those disease processes that want to take advantage of those who are not fit enough to fight them off. So I thank you for sharing that. I wasn't expecting that per se, but it definitely was something that I was very, very pleased to hear that. And maybe we'll be reaching out to you to get a little video to have up on our site for Safety Stand Down about the importance of fitness as it relates to fighting off cancer or other types of disease processes. Thank you for that.
That's awesome. You know, we talk about firefighters as athletes, and we truly are. The demand for our fitness for the job that we do is varied. But fitness comes back, and I've been reading along with what Gavin has said. So much is out there, and it's not just for firefighters, but as Gavin mentioned, it's for the entire population. Our health and our fitness are paramount for us to be able to fight off those attacks, whether it's the cold or whether it's the flu or cancer. So I think that that's really important. So thanks group for the great discussion. So this is about the time where I rely on Taylor to kind of go through the chat to bring us some questions that maybe we didn't address in the conversation. And at the end, as a reminder to me, she's going to put up a screen that has a QR code for both the membership for iChiefs and SHS and NFR. NFR is extremely important, as we talked about, that we want to make sure that everyone who's on here, if you haven't done so already, that you complete the survey on NFR. That's what our researchers need to help us answer some of these questions that we've talked about today. We need that research, as Frank mentioned, as Joe mentioned, as Chief Valentine mentioned, and I mentioned, that I need that research to go to my boss to say, this is why we need to do this. So Taylor, what do you have for us?
So I have a combination, and I'm sorry guys, I'm sick, so I sound gross, but I have a combination of things from the chat and then from people when they registered for it. And the first one I'm going to go with is, how do you hold people accountable for Decon without becoming the safety cop that everybody hates and ignores? And that's not for any one of you specifically, so anybody feel free to chime in if you can solve this problem for this person.
Well,
Sometimes you got to be the cop. Sometimes leadership matters. Sometimes you have to.
Joe?
No, I agree. And also be the leader. Show them it doesn't take a company officer or a department policy or anything else for you to do the right things. And if you're out there doing the right things, people will probably start asking you questions, even if it's to make fun of you, about what are you doing that for, right? And you simply tell them, I'm concerned about my health and want to ensure that I stay healthy. So again, it's a lot of personal accountability to me.
And Taylor, I'm going to add into that. In the county where I did my career, part of the training we did with firefighters is we gave and we empowered every single firefighter on any scene, if they see something unsafe, that they can call for emergency evacuation. They can, hey, you got to stop what you're doing so we can come back and reevaluate to protect our firefighters. Same thing here. We need to make sure, someone's got to call you out and do the right thing, because this is not about being a safety cop. This is about protecting the lives and health of not only that firefighter, not only that community, not only that fire department, but that family. And that family is a huge family. We're all here on this call. We understand when we talk about fire family, there are no lines. There's no state lines, there's no city lines, no county lines when we talk about fire family. So one death. Darren was at a service yesterday. If I wasn't out of town, I was planning to be there. It affects everybody.
So, and I will add, just as a final part of this, is that if preliminary exposure reduction, Decon, cancer exposure principles are not embedded into your recruit training, then you're missing a huge opportunity. Because what you permit persists, and if you permit complacency will be throughout your organization. So start at the very beginning. If you're not teaching cancer prevention in recruit training, there are plenty of resources out there for you to do so. If you're not focusing on behavioral health in recruit training, you're missing the boat. So if you're not starting at the beginning, then you're playing catch up throughout trying to get everybody else, on board. So start from the very beginning at recruit training. Start there. That's one key component that you can implement now.
And Chief Valentine, one thing that we've seen also be effective is when you do that cancer training for your firefighters, invite their families and let them hear exactly what the firefighters are exposed to and the things that they're able to do to reduce those exposures. Because I can promise you those spouses are going to be the ones who are hounding their loved one to make sure they are doing the right thing.
Well, I mean, when the firefighters are coming home from recruit training or coming home early in their career and they're exhausted, you know, it's going to be the spouse who's going to say, go to bed. You need your sleep. And we know that there is a direct link between sleep and cancer. So come on. I mean, yeah, include the families. So they'll have a better idea about what they're getting into when they have a spouse who's in this type of work.
Gavin. Yeah, that's like.
Agree with everything that has been said. But one other thing that might be worth doing is just listen to what are the concerns from the folks. As I mentioned, we've done this a number of times. And Chief Leeb has that video, but in order to do decon in those conditions, we had to think of other things. We had to have salt out there so people didn't slip on the ice that formed underneath there. We had to have warming tents afterwards. So there's other things that made that feasible. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to reduce the risk for exposures based on some of the other risks we might have for hypothermia, slips, trips, and falls, and injuries there. In the heat, right? If you have 10 people waiting in line to go through decon, you just came out of a burn building, you're wearing full bunker gear. Maybe if you're trying to stand there, your vibra alert's going off for 10 minutes. It's very hard. So can you put a second decon line in place? So what are the things that you might be able to do? Is there ways that you can get hydration to your firefighters while they're waiting? So sometimes the pushback on decon is there are real challenges in putting it into place. And so if you look at what those challenges are and what is coming from your members, you might be able to do some things to relieve those concerns while still allowing the implementation of the preliminary exposure reduction.
Awesome.
So the next question I'm going to throw at you is from the chat, and it says, what are your thoughts on transporting turnout gear in a Rubbermaid tote or something to that effect in an open cab vehicle? Which my first thought would be, you know, some sort of chief's buggy that doesn't have a specific department for gear.
I'll jump in. I think that's one option, but probably a cheaper and maybe easier option for folks is to use large industrial size trash bags. But the one thing I would add to that is make sure that they're clear trash bags, because we've actually had examples of gear that's been thrown out because they thought it was a bag of trash. So, but you can put all your gear in a large industrial trash bag, tie it up, and if it doesn't fit in a compartment, maybe put it on a hose bed, or if there's a room on top somewhere.
Perfect. Thank you.
The hierarchy of controls, that's an isolation control, that's an engineering control. There's a lot of ways that you could isolate your gear, whether it's being in a different compartment in the container talked about there, or the trash bags. All of it can be effective if there's no way of completely separating yourself from there. So it is one of those on the hierarchy of contamination controls that could be considered for sure.
And I'll add to that, the First Responder Center for Excellence has given away a couple of green gear bags this month if you go on our social media, and those in conjunction with gear bags. But the bottom line is you should be isolating your gear in some regard, right? So the gear might be, you did preliminary exposure reduction on scene, now you're putting it in your gear bag, or you're putting it in your tote, whatever it is, and then you're going to wash it when it gets back to the station as well. So it's one of the steps to make sure that we're not spreading contamination into these vehicles. And some of these chief's buggies, as Gavin pointed out, with volunteer firefighters, they bring them home. So your family may be in it as well. So you could potentially be giving other people an exposure without even recognizing that.
And now I'm thinking about all the times I got dropped off to school in my dad's buggy. I was the cool kid. Okay, so the next question I think is interesting, because I think each one of you is going to have a different response to this. We've talked a lot about culture. I put this in the chat, but I'm going to share a quote from my favorite book, which is that culture is just as much about what you allow as it is what you actively encourage. What is the number one thing that the company officers and the chief officers need to stop tolerating if they really want their department to be serious about cancer prevention? And I'm going to call on Joe first, just because he's at the top of the list on my screen, and then Gavin, and then Frank.
and I hope I'm not changing your question, Taylor, but I'm going to go away from tolerating and reverse it really. And what can they do, right? And that's hold their people accountable and lead by example. I think that's the biggest thing. Like I said, if the company officer is coming out of a structure, or they finish a car fire and they're going over and they're doing their decon and they're using their wipes, and if possible, washing their hands even on scene, the people who they're responsible for are going to see that and will most likely follow their lead because they're seeing that it's the right thing to do.
Thank you. Gavin, what are your thoughts on that?
I got to get off of mute here. Yeah, in general, I think lead by example is the most important thing that you can do, as Joe mentioned. But if we're talking about one thing that in terms of enforcement, I think respiratory protection is one of those things that a chief officer can hey, put that back on while you're in overhaul. Making sure that there's respiratory protection is one thing where the investment has been made, right? So having respiratory protection used in more places than it is in on a lot of fire grounds, but also during training, overhaul, investigation, all of those things, I think is something that a company officer can very easily focus on, making that reminder and providing that respiratory protection, which is one of the most direct routes for contaminants to get into the body and to affect a systemic exposure.
Thank you, sir. And Frank?
Well, they both already hit the most important things that they can do: lead by example and respiratory protection. So the number, right? So if you're leading by example, you're doing respiratory protection. And then you're also, when you get back, you're making sure that we're not wearing dirty gear, the rest of the tour or the next day. But they already hit the top one. So that would be like number 2 or 3 about the gear.
Thank you, sir.
Is that all of them, Taylor?
I mean, there's others we could ask, but I know we're already over time.
Okay, well, we'll just kind of wrap it up. First of all, for everyone watching, you can see on the screen the QR code to the left is for the National Firefighter Registry. The one on the right is the one to join IFC or the Safety, Health, and Survival section. Feel free to fill those out. The most important one is the one on the left, I think. And you can fill that out whether you are a current firefighter, retired firefighter, volunteer, career, does not matter. If you have been in the fire service, if you're an investigator, everyone is welcome to fill that out. I want to thank Frank and Gavin and Joe very much for taking time out of your busy day. And Frank, make sure you tell everybody in North Carolina we appreciate them staying on and watching and participating. That is just awesome that you were able to do that and make that happen. I want to thank Darren. Thank you for co-hosting with me today. You and I know we've had a lot of conversations.
What helps you the most as a trauma surgeon who's receiving the patient?
Oh.
All of the different.
We are very passionate about the same thing, and so I appreciate you standing in today for Dan. For everyone, our next session is going to be February 19th at 11 a.m. again, and we're going to discuss heart health. So thank you very much for your time today, and we will see you all next month on February 19th at 11 a.m.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.